Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on national television about India's foreign relations, India's growing influence in the world, the key themes and trends and patterns in Indian engagement with the rest of the world, and how India is making the world a better place through creative and sincere contributions. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking up a very important grand theme of Indian foreign policy, which is soft power. This term, coined by the well-known American social scientist Joseph Nye, has a history of over 3 decades. But India is an ancient civilization with a great deal of influence on many parts of the world by sheer attraction of its values, its cultures, and of course its actions. And we are going to be discussing all aspects relating to Indian soft power and how it has been growing in recent years. And to discuss this, I have a very special guest in the studio with me, Mr. Prafulla Ketkar. Prafulla Ketkar ji is editor of Organiser, very important national magazine of India, and also well-known nationalist intellectual among journalists. Prafulla ji, thank you so much for being with us. To start with, soft power of India, the well springs of it come from our ancient glorious civilization. This land has created 4 major world religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism. They've all emanated from here. The philosophy as well, both the religious and spiritual as well as the secular ideas and thoughts, and it's been a Vishwa Guru, as we say. So that aspect of our soft power is quite critical, isn't it? And that's where in many ways it all begins, because this country has such an enormous influence. Sometimes we don't calculate and valorize it enough. But take us, the audience, through this Bharat, the journey of Bharat, because that is where our soft power began long before social scientists coined this term soft power.
Thank you, Professor Sreeram, for having me on Indian Diplomacy. I essentially have a problem with this concept itself called soft and power. Power essentially is an ability to influence the behavior and the decision-making process of others through coercive means. So how it can be soft? So the coinage of Vishwa Guru, or the righteous power, the righteousness is important. We are the only existing civilization that has stood through all onslaught and survived on our own edifice. You look at from North America to Latin America to
many
Africa,
parts have succumbed to invaders.
Now, where are those indigenous communities and red Indians? They are just in museums. And the same countries are preaching human rights and democracy and
even soft power.
And soft power to the world. Now, we are the only civilization. Perhaps the other exception could have been China, but thanks to again the CCP and the communist paradigm and the authoritarian regime, China cannot exercise that influence and the trust that civilizational state can have. So India is the only exception in this entire endeavor to practice this civilizational influence. Now, what is the core of this civilizational influence? I would like to term it as spiritual democracy. If you take whether the capitalist path or the communist path or any other religious paradigm in cultural terms, they essentially believe that the human evolution is linear, and so entire world has to move in one direction, on one path. And that's why the political ideologies and the diplomacy emanating from those ideologies, follow the same practice, same path of making others follow what you believe to be good for yourself. So, whether market oriented or whether state controlled, Bharat is the only civilization that talks about, and what I termed as spiritual democracy, where everybody has a right to choose his or her own path. And the first person who articulated this on the world stage was Swami Vivekananda.
Absolutely.
And that's why he clearly says the question is not of tolerance or intolerance. The question is of acceptance. Whether you accept that other has a right to follow some different path to reach to the same truth or not is the fundamental question. And that is not just related to the spiritual or religious affairs, that is true even with the political and economic affairs. And even the international system that you want to follow for the stable, peaceful, prosperous, because the resources are limited and everybody has to coexist. That idea of coexistence is being challenged because of this linearity.
And that is the essence of our philosophy and our ethos. And that's probably why, as you said, because there's so much freedom in this land since time immemorial, that people are attracted to it, because very few societies have allowed so much individual as well as group freedom as we have done so. And I think that's what makes us so appealing. Prafulla, there's also, in other parts of the world, people admire our yoga, our Ayurveda. Now the WHO has established a Center for Traditional Medicine here in India for global promotion of alternatives. And also there are classical art forms, performing arts. There's so much cultural expression that we have, and which many people find attractive around the world. So one is the spirituality and the philosophy and the deeper metaphysical ideas. Then there is the knowledge systems like mathematics and science, and we've made huge contributions the world accepts. And then there is this, the more popular expressions. Now we have Bollywood and folk music and all. International community finds that very appealing about India.
See, in 1945, the system of United Nations came into existence, and since then, perhaps first time ever, somebody saw one country proposing an idea, 177 countries, supporting that idea, and entire world accepting that unanimously. That is International Day of Yoga. So, why? Because the idea of yoga or the idea of dharma was never based on sectorial or religious ideas. The idea of yoga or the idea of dharma is basically to connect with the universe, and therefore the path can be different, but it is not at the cost of others.
It's a non-hegemonic and not based on dominance,
because this,
or aggression.
This idea of either one-upmanship or zero-sum game, that is the popular terminology in international politics. Our spiritual thinking, our rishis had already transcended that. So they always talked about Manav Dharma. So, and entire world knows this very well. They accepted what they found good for themselves in terms of values, in terms of practices, in terms of even symbols.
Yeah. So that is the inherent attraction, like iron fillets coming around a magnet. Viewers, there's one very important element of Indian soft power, very famous Sanskrit concept called Vasudev Kutumbakam. The world is one family. I want you to hear Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi talking about how this has been the bedrock of our soft power and our approach to the world, and then continue the discussion. Let's listen in.
भारत एक राष्ट्र होने के साथ ही एक महान परंपरा है, एक वैचारिक अधिष्ठान है, एक संस्कार की सरिता है। भारत वो शीर्ष चिंतन है जो वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की बात करता है। भारत दूसरे के नुकसान की कीमत पर अपने उत्थान के सपने नहीं देखता। भारत अपने साथ संपूर्ण मानवता के, पूरी दुनिया के कल्याण की कामना करता है। आज जब हम आत्मनिर्भर भारत अभियान को आगे बढ़ाते हैं, तो विश्व के लिए प्रगति की नई संभावनाएं खोलने की भी बात करते हैं। आज जब हम योग के प्रसार के लिए प्रयास करते हैं तो विश्व के हर व्यक्ति के लिए सर्वे संतु निरामया की कामना करते हैं। क्लाइमेट चेंज और सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट जैसे विषयों को लेकर भी भारत की आवाज पूरी मानवता का प्रतिनिधित्व कर रही है। ये समय भारत के इस अभियान को आगे बढ़ाने का है।
Heard Prime Minister of India talking about how India's well-being and India's growth and prosperity is intrinsically linked to that of the world, and we don't see it as a zero-sum game, as Prafulla Ketkar ji was saying earlier. Prime Minister has beautifully explained how there is a deeper value system behind underpinning our diplomacy and the way we approach the world, which is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And that kind of broad-mindedness, that open-mindedness is really our strength, isn't it, Prafulla ji?
See, what happens many a times, we remember one cliche, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but we forget the first part of it. Ayam nijaha paro vitti ganana lagu chetasam. This is mine, this is yours, is the sign of lagu chetasam, the narrow-mindedness.
Narrow-minded.
Udara charita nam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The essential, the so-called liberal that evolved in Europe in modern context.
It's a very different thing from ours.
It's very different because this liberal stems from the philosophical, spiritual position where entire world is seen as one family. So in Indian context, there is no concept, there was traditionally no concept of borders. There was no concept of, dividing something as, we and they in binaries. Another important Vedic dictum that guided we as a nation.
Ekam Sat
Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. So that truth is one. But there can be many ways to reach to the same truth.
So that universal appeal of India is very much linked to these core ideas that are very sophisticated and refined, and also very humanistic, as Prafulla ji is saying. Prafulla ji, the other, if you come to the contemporary modern era, another reason why India is widely admired is because despite being a developing country, it has stuck to the path of democracy, and that path of democracy is quite distinct from the liberal democracy of Western countries, but also very different from the authoritarian regimes, and maybe it comes from this uniqueness that you have spoken about, which are from our value system. The way Indian people have participated in our democracy and have strengthened it, the levels, the degrees of participation, the kind of competition we have between political parties, free and fair elections, credible results, barring a brief period from 1975 to 77, you never veered away from democracy. I think that is what makes it a beacon, right? I mean, for a lot of developing countries, the temptations of becoming authoritarian are really great, and they have often fallen either into civil war like situations or gone for strong or a hard state. But we have actually maintained this democratic tradition, and maybe it's linked to that spiritual democracy you spoke about. The electoral democracy and the participative democracy of modern times is perhaps a continuum from that, and that's what I think stands India apart. Why a lot of countries and people admire and like us is because we are a democracy, and that's something, the world's largest democracy and the mother of all democracies.
Many people, even Indian intellectuals, perceive that it's because of the constitutional scheme, that idea of India evolved. What we gained in 1947 was, yes, on one hand political independence, two, we became one centralized state, and we came up with a one important document for our independent India, that is Constitution of India. But the seeds of our democracy are one in spiritual democracy and diversity. We talk about federalism, for instance. But we didn't borrow, as Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar rightly said, we didn't borrow the model of federalism from the US. We had different models. Prime Minister, while talking about we being mother of all democracies, often talks about, Vaishali and Lichvi and the Sabhas and the Samitis.
Sanghas, yeah.
Again, one important thing is we always considered or measured our kings who are responsive to these democratic principles, who believed in that righteousness and responded to what Sabha and Samiti is recommending to him. So, the idea of Dharmarajya was never theocratic state, but it was a righteous state.
Based on good governance principles, yeah.
So, the participatory approach, the transparency, the justice, distribution, accountability, these were the cardinal principles that were inherent in our state mechanism.
Our political culture
Our
has
political culture. And that's why it allowed us, despite, this, foreign aggressions and then colonial domination for such a long time, we still, we are conversing now in English. And there is nothing wrong in, talking in English. But please remember, in India, multiple languages existed for over millennia. And we never fought on the basis of languages. So whatever little differences we developed, it's only in the post-colonial phase.
Right.
Because we also started believing from the European prism, like because they also had the language-based nation states.
Yeah, territorial division.
Territorial division. So idea was, for us, the idea of nationhood was never just territorial. It was more cultural, civilizational idea.
And like you said, we never believed in boundaries.
Every irrespective of languages, everybody believed in the idea of Kailasa, the Kanyakumari, the importance of Indian Ocean, the importance of sacred rivers, water bodies around. So the sustainability approach is again inherent there. You don't have to. So for us, democracy is not just about a model of polity or a constitutional scheme of things. Democracy for us is all these aspects of transparency, accountability, participation in decision making, and that's why we have multiple levels of governance. Earlier, our model was more decentralized governance and unified idea of nationhood.
Contradiction.
What happened in colonial period was the British Empire tried to create the centralized idea of statehood and divided our identities on different terms because their European reference was different.
Right.
That prism, imposing that prism on others has been the fundamental thinking behind colonialism. That's why they considered us uncultured and uncivilized and as if it's the white man's burden.
But they could not break
now not just in actions. After 75 years, we are challenging that intellectually, and that is actually giving us a lot of strength, even politically and diplomatically, to carry those ideas forward.
Absolutely. Indian democracy is getting stronger, deeper, and more decentralized. A lot of people are coming into the mainstream and are joining the mainstream, and this is the biggest story, I think, of the 21st century. If you look at it, 1.3 to 1.4 billion people enjoying democratic freedoms like nowhere else on the planet. Viewers, Prafulla has also mentioned this, and there is the diplomacy and foreign policy aspect of soft power, and soft power also entails how you increase your influence in other parts of the world using a strategy. And on this, I want you to listen into India's External Affairs Minister Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, who spoke about soft power from the point of view of a policy maker at the national level. Let's listen in.
How do I see it as a foreign minister, as someone who's looked at the world and diplomacy? Where does soft power fit in the larger scheme of things? I regard it today, in fact, as absolutely central to the rebalancing which is going on in the world. A rebalancing which will create, which is already creating, multipolarity. Typically, when we think of rebalancing, we look at the economic facet. We say, okay, these are the 20 countries with the largest GDP. Or we look at the military facet. We say, okay, these countries have nuclear weapons, or they have power projection, or they have a veto in the UN Security Council. But rebalancing is something much more, because beyond economics, beyond politics, beyond orthodox conventional parameters of strength and influence, that is really where soft power comes into play. And we have seen in history that there can be very powerful countries, but who have actually failed in the soft power front, and therefore met political reverses. It is not something which is that far back in history. So I see today culture, that connecting through culture, the comfort that is growing about India, I see that actually as very, very central to the rebalancing, and something which works very much to India's advantage.
Viewers, you heard the External Affairs Minister of India talking about rebalancing and changing power equations. And Prafulla, there was Western hegemony during colonial era. Now there is also attempted Chinese hegemony across the world using their own Confucian value systems and all that. But I think what he's saying is that we have stood our ground, and comfort, the word comfort that is used, very important, because like you said, people are comfortable with the idea of India coming in, assisting them, India offering all kinds of support to various countries. We have done vaccine Maitri and mission life, lots of humanitarian and disaster relief rescue missions we do for around the world. Our development partnerships are really flourishing in the global south. People like the idea of India because we don't come in a threatening or in a imposing way. And I think what he's saying is that is something that's ultimately going to help this rebalancing effort, because we will emerge as a an alternative power center in the world, thanks to this core inherent soft power of ours and the way we are using it to determine our tactics and strategies in foreign policy.
See, this entire idea of Vishwaguru, that's why it becomes important, because when you are talking about the status of being Guru, it inspires, it enlightens. It doesn't use that. Many traders from western coast of India went to Africa, even before the British or the European powers reached there. They actually mixed up in those societies and communities with their indigenous culture so well, and still taught them many business. So they flourished. They flourished along with Indian businessmen. They never created a model of exploitation there. They are never seen as
our diaspora is widely respected,
and that's why our diaspora, even in present day, we are seeing they are adding a value to it. Whatever existing there, we respect those models, because many a times we use these terms that we have diverse cultures in India. No, I believe that what is the unique position of India? I believe that India has a unique culture that celebrates diversity. We know that essentially the spirit that is existing in every living being is the same, and still we allow that diversity to flourish. That when we talk about unity in diversity, we never understand the fundamental philosophical, and when we extend that to diplomatic practices, you talked about vaccine Maitri. Didn't our policymakers know that there is a pressure of ensuring vaccine supply in our domestic needs? But still we ensure that whatever best we can, we extended it to the larger world, and not small numbers. In millions we supply
over
vaccines.
100 countries. Yeah.
The same is about this entire idea of life. Or for example, the way we initiated the entire concept of Solar Alliance.
Yes.
So we are not talking about
Narrow-minded,
narrow-minded,
self-interested.
only national interest based. Yes, because the present nation state system, the Westphalian system, is both based on those parameters. We cannot compromise on, you know, the economic progress and even the military strength, even the advancement in space technology, but that doesn't mean that we are going to use it to impose something on others. In fact, we are leveraging that to create a goodwill for all. We are not talking about, you know, the even maximum numbers, as Prime Minister rightly said. It's not just, it's sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhavantu sukhina.
Everybody.
So every living being should be, and in coherence with the principles of nature, imbibing those natural laws for human living. That has been the fundamental, and that's why life philosophy, you know, when that is become a practice, Indian thinking automatically becomes acceptable, because people are realizing the limitations of this. All these crises are creation of last 300 years.
Yeah.
Emanating, and you talked about Confucius. It is not Confucius. It is the
Now it's a Marxist-Leninist.
Is the CCP, the
Yeah.
communist model that is creating inhibitions about the Chinese, you know, postures. So everything that China does is seen with suspicion.
Yeah.
Everything that America does is seen with suspicion. While when India does it,
It's not.
It's seen as, you know, a more benevolent, collective good, that kind of approach.
Absolutely.
That is the difference.
Viewers, service to humanity, you know, that has been the central theme of Indian foreign policy, and that's one of the reasons why we have never expected anything in return, and we do so much good around the world. I want to thank Prafulla Ketkar ji for a very, you know, thought-provoking discussion about the wellsprings of Indian foreign soft power, and how we look at the world, because often we have been misrepresented by vested interests, and the point is India is now able to express itself and let the world know that we have something special to give, and we come from a great civilization, and that's our tradition is what matters ultimately in shaping the way we are conducting ourselves today. So Prafulla Ketkar ji, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real revelation.
Thank you.
Viewers, do think about soft power and the way we have discussed it, different subcomponents of soft power, and Prafulla Ketkar ji even questioned the concept of soft power. Maybe we should devise alternative means of expressing how influential and how important India is. I'll see you again very soon. Until then, take care.